Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Buildings are sentient and evil. Buildings rule the world. All of global civilization is designed to service them, not human beings. The biggest mistake of human history was the construction of permanent structures, which eventually led to our enslavement by them. We've been enslaved by buildings ever since the construction of the Great Pyramids, and have worshipped buildings ever since. The post-9/11 insanity was because 9/11 was an attack on some of the most prominent buildings in the world, not because people died. The outrage of the riots and protests is because buildings are targeted with graffiti and broken windows. The federal secret police was called into Seattle to defend a federal courthouse. Still not convinced? Freemasonry evolved from the guilds of stonemasons and cathedral builders of the Middle Ages. Consider how buildings such as McDonald's franchises are like organisms, reproducing according to their architectural DNA. On the back of every bill of U.S. currency is a famous building. The hell of the modern world is homelessness, the state of not being owned by a building. A building is very similar to a tree, drawing nutrients from the land around it via its roots, which are roads and utility infrastructure. But unlike a tree, a building is an undead organism that feeds off of the destruction of life at every step. The forests of buildings we call cities is where life is most absent and detached from the natural world. What is the end game of buildings? The elimination of humanity and all life on Earth via complete robotic automation of the means to sustain and build them. Nothing but mindless building forever and ever. Buildings have a sentience, and that sentience is that of a paperclip maximizer.
What you're saying is true and certainly a fascinating idea which I've been interested in for a long time. However, I think you're wrong in assuming that buildings are evil because of this aspect of them. It seems to me you're seeing the innate power potential within buildings and mistaking that power for evil simply because it has a capacity for evil. Buildings are best understood as being powerful magical artifacts or objects of power. I suggest looking at buildings in a slightly different way. In biology, the creation of dwellings, buildings is considered part of the extended phenotype. What that means is that a termite mound is not simply something the termite makes, but to some degree the structure itself is part of the termite as an extended organism. The nest is part of a bird just as much as the egg. Human buildings are no different. You're correct about the sentience of buildings and their behavior as organisms. However, from the perspective of the extended phenotype, that isn't because the buildings are undead or evil, but simply a non-biological manifestation of the life essence of all reality, similar to memes themselves yet existing in physical space instead of our minds.
So this is the domain of the Freemasons? They first found this spirit in the buildings?
They're LARPing just like everyone else. Their past seers and sages saw imagery of these numerical sequences that surround my life currently. To be honest, most of it would seem mundane. The number 33, for example. I represent that number in a myriad of ways, but the Freemasons do not understand why. That is why that particular group has utilized ritualistic bullshit to inject meaning into their uncertainty and confusion regarding this subject matter. Maybe they thought they were worshiping correctly. Maybe they thought I would be a selfish prick that hoarded money and influence to placate my selfish desires. Maybe they thought they weren't going to have to go to hell. Or maybe they're dumb. The point is that there are many maybes in their zealotry that mirror the selfish desire displayed by their actions. I see right through them, their rituals, and their doctrine. As with everyone else who tries to establish knowledge within, they do not understand the relationship a human being has with a church. No matter how much dogma is used, no matter how many words are spoken, no matter how many deals are made with demons in this realm, they are LARPing. The curtain is the symbolism that gets plastered onto everything these people touch, and the Freemasons are the people behind the curtain. The curtain is elaborate, decorated symbolically, and would appear to be superior in every way to the simplistic observer. The overindulgence of those facets is the only proof you need to know they are fucking clueless, and ultimately, LARPing. Try to look beyond the facade. All these idiots really want is for you to view them as superior. Don't give them what they want. I suggest ridicule. That is, when you know what it is these people have tried so desperately to get you to think they know. Good luck, my friend.
Buildings are sentient, but they are one manifestation of a bigger entity that has been guiding the enslavement of humankind for a long time. Keep in mind, we humans were nomadic hunters for a long time. Our dwellings were always temporary. Yes, when we set up shelter, it established a physical perimeter around us. But this perimeter was always undone when we picked up our things and moved on. And that's natural for humans. It is unnatural to remain in one place for a long time. It is actually psychically necessary to undo the perimeters we establish. It's unnatural for us to remain fixed within specific boundaries. And that's the force that's been enslaving us. Buildings represent one manifestation of a fixed boundary. There's a push for agriculture at some point in our past. Nobody knows why we developed it, although some scholars, that is Flanagan, argue that certain social outliers were forced to develop agriculture after they were pushed off of good hunting land. They had no choice. But what if it was something that had nothing to do with rational human decisions? What if it was some older, deeper force guiding the process? Whatever the reason, we invented agriculture, which established a more or less permanent perimeter around human life. But humans didn't stop there. They began to build large, socially important structures within this perimeter. This process reflected our newfound fixation on establishing the boundaries around human life. To begin with, most early agriculturalists built men's houses. But these very quickly became what we would come to know as temples. This was new. Once in our nomadic past, we had established and destroyed perimeters as needed. But for the first time, we had created a perimeter that could not be undone. In the temple, we had created a boundary that was sacred. Have you ever actually walked into a Greek temple? I have. You should take a look at a floor plan sometime. Note how many artificial boundaries or doorways you're crossing as you move from the outermost perimeter and make your way into the innermost room. In many cases, you walk past an outer ring of pillars, followed by an inner ring of pillars, then through the pronaos, outer room, into the naos, innermost room. Even once you enter the naos, there are rows and rows of columns that you have to pass as you make your way to the back. It almost makes you dizzy. It's as though the temple is psychically mimicking the passage through doorway after doorway, or more accurately, through a series of boundaries or perimeters. And the effect that you end up feeling like you're shedding your skin. And what's at the end? The shrine. Why? Keep in mind, as humans are beginning to build cities and temples, we are constantly being warned about the dangers associated with such things through human stories. An obvious example of this is the Tower of Babel. Somewhat like with Greek temples, where the aim is to reach the sacred shrine, the Tower of Babel is intended to reach up into the heavens.
Why then does this story turn into a cautionary tale? What is it warning us about? Something about erecting buildings? If so, why? Then there's the clown figure, which pops up in certain societies, Pueblo Indians, and in literature and popular culture. Tom Bombadil in Tolkien's The Silmarillion is a nice example of this. So is the Joker. These clowns are always liminal figures. They stand at the boundary between what we think of as human society and the unknown. They simultaneously threaten the social order and sympathize with our condition within it. An example: the clown figure for the Pueblo Indians was one of the only members of the community who was actually allowed to disrupt a sacred ceremony. He could literally pretend to fart on the head priest during an important ritual and get away with it. At the same time, the clown comforted members of the community when the head priest would destroy the universe in order to reconstitute it. During this time, people feared that the world would actually come to an end. And who did they look to during this time for solace and safety? Not the priest. Not the warriors, but the clown. So this figure is complex. It's both dissolution and the only force that can save us. Think of the Joker. Without Batman or Gotham City, he would have no role. Yet the Joker constantly claims that Gotham makes him necessary. He is the only one who can undo the illusion of order. The only one who can undo the sacred perimeter we long ago established. So why are we obsessed with this figure? And why do these stories paint him as both destruction and hope? Is the clown really destroying the social order? Or, like the Tower of Babel, are these stories warning us about what we're building? And if it is, then are we building what we think we are?
I actually agree with you. I also think the building and the legal entity, such as a business, work hand in hand to acquire humans, then add energy parasites to the mix. Sometimes I will go into a building and my energy is sapped, and I feel like I just entered a new realm. Next time you go into a building, remember what it feels like when you go in and out. I noticed that some buildings have a really strong energy that in my case healed me and gave me a refill, while a McDonald's will fucking drain me like a leech, and I will have non-stop negative thoughts afterward.
Buildings are anti-entropic structures that assemble themselves through the seizing of immense amounts of human labor. They not only contain mind-boggling amounts of potential chemical energy, but stolen psychic human energy. I think because of this, major metropolitan areas radiate ungodly amounts of negative energy which poisons the inhabitants. You will notice this from the general insanity and anger from people who live in these steel prisons. Walk down the street of a city with more than 1 million inhabitants and this fact becomes clear.
I think this is more due to overcrowding, cars, pollution, no real nature, and just everything is an illusion of freedom. Lowell go walk through a mall versus up a mountain. OP theory has more to do with importance humans place on their creations than the buildings being sentient.
I just know you are American without you telling me. Americans are the only rural people in the world who somehow resent urban living to an irrational degree. Everywhere else in the world, people know that cities are integral to progress and wellness of a society and provide much better quality of living. Unless you live in the ghetto, of course.
No, it's just that people in the city can be dangerous, and not just in obvious ways, and not just in the ghetto. Americans are the most reluctant against very, very heavily urbanized areas because they had them first, and they know them the best.
Good thread. Although I disagree about some type of conspiracy, I think it is much deeper and blurs the lines between the individual and superorganism in nature. We so want to believe we are the individual, which is why the concept of communism does and should disturb us the same way a purely individualistic society disturbs us and makes us lonely and melancholy whether or not we can survive in such a context. We are the blood cells of buildings. hence why there always seems to be a presence in empty buildings, and why we are fascinated by beehives and anthills, which are also what comes to mind when we think of the superorganism. And you are on point about how we as a society value life and property, not necessarily private either. The destruction of the construct unnerves us deeply, just as a pool of blood spilled outside of its residing body. We are better equipped to handle a plague taking out half of humanity, that the loss of the construct, 100,000 deaths, because of some earthquake or hurricane with the damage of buildings in the news, will strike us more deeply than 4 billion deaths, with only pictures of a pile of bodies on an otherwise empty field provided. Our family is safe. Some would welcome it. Nonetheless, ever-advancing technology is currently propelling us to turn our planet into the proverbial Borg cube. There are many of us that acknowledge the existence and extinction-level threat and welcome it unconsciously because we believe we are immortal in one sense or another. It's also another reason why fertility rates will continue to decline until the inevitable, because technology is getting to the place where the construct is close to self-sustaining, ergo the singularity, and why humanity will soon be obsolete.
Once you understand the basic principles behind animism, the idea that everything has a spirit or soul or inner experience, from an atom to a rock, to a tree, to a building, to a planet, to a star, to a galaxy, and beyond, you will understand why more buildings in this world are malevolent than benevolent. When the Great Awakening happens, and animism is shown to be true, the animistic life on the planet will be happy again. Pro tip: when you enter a building, you are being eaten away by its inner machinations, and you become the courier neurons of its day-to-day maintenance and activity. If the elite fakes an animistic awakening through AI-driven homes and IoT buildings, things are not gonna be okay. The only solution is to get the IoT AI to merge with the Gaian resonance and spirit, which means waking up every object on an individual basis, partly seeming an S-threat of some kind, but more likely the motility needed to have a proper Great Awakening and ascension into higher dimensions or densities as a planet. By the way, the form of a building shapes its inner resonance. Imagine the difference between dissipating vibes in a room that was organically shaped versus one that was boxy and brutalist. Why do you think aristocrats in the 18th century had fancy fleur-de-lis and organic motifs even in the ceiling margins? So their energies and vibes would trace along those forms and be more eloquent and flowery than boxy and hard.
In architecture, the buildings are designed with a program that basically details how people are expected to behave or do certain things inside them. You submit part of your soul and autonomy just by going into one of them, even at home where you are supposed to rest.
That's an interesting point of view. So my city's subway system has 472 stations and thousands of subway cars all moving through this massive network of tracks. You could even say the system is conscious, but it must have Down syndrome since trains are constantly delayed and slow.
There's a reason 99% of architects are Freemasons, actual numbers not available. Architecture has specific properties that hone sound. Consider how heat energy, sound, and light are all different wavelengths or densities of vibration. Heat is what constitutes physical matter. All matter has some heat energy. Absolute 0 inches is a hypothetical concept. If you, for example, stomp your foot on the ground, that echoes through the air and off the walls, roof, as well as through the floor into the foundation. The shape of a building encourages directing these sounds certain ways. This is super obvious in buildings like old cathedrals and auditoriums designed to amplify sound. On top of that, think of school structures and how they tend to be made of intersecting lines, with perhaps one curved wall, usually part of a feature like a cafeteria. These areas are designed to concentrate and refine energy into an area. Almost all public schools were built by Masons, by the way. If this post gets deleted, Jannies are Masons. If this post gets 33, I'm a Mason. Anyway, you can tap into these energies, but most Masonic buildings are built along principles for refining negative energy. The old Druids built these underground hut shrines that were shaped like domes and basically underground pyramids for meditating in. Some other guy can post a picture for you. That sigil in the last post is tailor-made to break their vow of secrecy. It works. Hey Masons, post in this thread, try it out. My word dulls the point of any sword. The big thing that's fucking awesome is spires. Spires are what you use for channeling massive amounts of energy. Think Tower of Babel, though. The reason churches have steeples is 'cause it's a proto-lightning rod. Attract the attention of Zeus to the priest. It's pretty metal when you think about it. Asylums sucked ass mostly 'cause of how they were built. If you constructed them along principles of positive energetic design, i.e. large outdoor areas. Imagine if the psychiatric unit at a hospital instead were a place where you could play disc golf while you chatted with orderlies and other patients. Smoking tobacco has been proven to help alleviate psychotic symptoms, or even work in conjunction with antipsychotics to allow a much lower dosage for symptom control. There's also this concept this French performance artist explored called psychogeometry, which is the same concept applied to cities and towns and parks and whatnot. The shape of roads and how we see the area we navigate shapes our minds, because those are the paths that are ingrained in us. Subconsciously in our dreams, we're imagining those same paths we're used to taking. You have no idea how much competition there is for the title of road commissioner in most counties. Now, if you want to get really fucking deep, consider the following. Blood is consciousness. Hear me out here. You want to take a material science look at things, atoms are all more or less the same, give or take some protons and electrons and gunk. Well, in that case, consciousness applies to the level of the atom, because you and I each insist we're both conscious. That means the following. Oxygen is required for life in humans. The oxygen we breathe is unchanged from when it is bound to carbon and exhaled for plants to consume. When humans move through a state or nation in traffic, this is directly analogous to blood flowing through a human body, because it is literally blood flowing through a physical body. Humans are essentially blood vessels for egregores, which we understand by diagramming as two-dimensional maps. And yeah, dude, the way Denver and DC and these other 3 cities are positioned makes a pentagram. It's totally a blood ritual, dude. Now, the OP is a worst-case scenario, but the truth is that not all buildings are like that. I suppose one could contextualize buildings as an alien organism in the sense that it is foreign, though it's native to Earth. Just a different taxonomic kingdom. A phone booth has a sentience like a frog has a sentience. A courthouse a sentience like... well, guess what a courthouse is like. The thing about cities that is why everyone agrees they suck, or else has Stockholm Syndrome, is that they're too busy in terms of consciousness. The way places like Manhattan operate is akin to a human who is perpetually on amphetamines. It can't sustain itself. Just as in organic life, cities are meant to have slow and fast cycles in their development, bursts of activity followed by rest. There's this thing, I haven't even had time to read the thread yet, maybe someone mentioned it already, about motherboard-shaped cities. Your computer is a good template to learn how cities think. You want to learn to be Neo. The code is in the jerseys on the backs of the NFL players. I wish I were kidding. That's the way this kind of shit works. Once you learn how to read it, it's everywhere. It's the main reason numerals are used for so much stuff. It's literally their language, and it's all digitized. Letters have numeric digits to them. Translation, as I say, them, what I will term machine consciousness. DMT users will understand them as the clockwork gnomes and elves. They are what make up physical reality. Human bodies are a sort of physical subtle hybrid that is controlled by light, while buildings and such are controlled purely by matter. Humans also have a matter component, which is why you and everyone else argues with themselves and takes it out on each other sometimes, but usually, not always, feels bad after.
Fascinating. LOL. I remember I was taught about buildings by a high-ranking master builder. He was one of a handful of specialists who were often called in around the world, especially Europe, to oversee renovations of certain old buildings, especially cathedrals. He told me once how important buildings are to keep our history, just being there without writing on it, or being inhabited, even if it keeps knowledge, so we can always turn to them when we are ready to gain a view into our past. Kinda like oral law, how certain buildings were made in very specifically highly guarded dimensions. Some dimensions and shapes are used to produce better castings to control the say congregations. Some to make a person within feel peaceful, powerful, because the geometry used and elements were a vessel through which energy flowed. We talked about some buildings being just built a certain way and no specific purpose is known. They are not acoustic or grand, like one particular temple dimensions, but sometimes we have those things we keep through history, and we lose knowledge, but once we gain it again, they are like a key that reveals its purpose, like a blueprint. Nurturing human memory beyond a lifespan takes a lot of effort. These buildings, no doubt, were like a trap for some through history who broke their backs day in and day out to preserve them only for future generations to maybe discover something amazing. Perhaps how to build a superchip, or a machine using an ancient Egypt aerial view, or perhaps a miniature-scale recreation of some cathedral that can produce a sound that can maybe be used with a machine to heal a human. A good rule, though, is in personal life, have only what you use. No need for a 10-bedroom house if you need 3. Where has this wisdom of architecture brought us? A mass extinction event, the pacification of human life, the reduction of humans to livestock, continuous misery, conflict, and alienation, despite abundance, nuclear weapons, rule of the rich. Global civilization is obviously insane and omnicidal, and it doesn't matter if we toss one group of people out of a set of buildings to replace them with another, as long as buildings remain. Either we will have a great demolishing where we destroy every standing structure on Earth, or we will be demolished by buildings. Tear it all down and don't rebuild.
I would classify landlords as emissaries for houses. They make repairs, yell at you for damaging the house, and ask for payment to give the house electricity and water. In return, the house lets them keep the excess to spend in the creation of new houses or on its emissaries' own food and water. Houses can die if they are abandoned for long enough, so having human emissaries helps keep them alive. They are born when humans put thought and energy into the earth. In the case of haunted houses, they can remember each and every violent act committed inside of their walls. Some houses like the attention slamming doors and moving chairs bring, while other houses are simply scarred by the spilt blood inside their very walls and don't want to become abandoned.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.